Hey, do you not want to play games which are really fast-paced anymore? Well, I got a solution. Turn-based games, where the only thing you need is basically your brain. And I found 3 turn-based games on Roblox, which are pretty fun to play alone, but even better with friends. And each one of them has its own unique fight style, ranging from Paper Mario to basically Civilization 4. And let's start with the game with probably the most strategic gameplay, Noobs in Combat. In Noobs in Combat, you play as noobs fighting literally anything, from actual soldiers to just toys, with their military. While not having a connected story from my knowledge, it does have a campaign mode with smaller stories in each chapter. The game has a grid-like combat system with your units and the enemy units on it. Your goal in the game usually changes, but the main one is to capture all the enemy outposts and headquarters before the enemy captures yours. You do that with a variety of units you're given, each specializing in something different. For example, infantry is the most basic unit, with just a gun and sometimes grenades for vehicles or buildings. Flamethrowers being insane for dealing with enemies indoors and infantry. Mortars and howitzers being great artillery, and gunners great for protecting flanks and hiding in bushes for surprise attacks. One special thing about Noobs in Combat is the radio and ticks mechanic. Radio is a passive ability some units have and artillery units need for them to actually work, and ticks being passive income mid-game which you can use to spawn in more units. Later in the game, vehicles like tanks get introduced with devastating damage. However, they're unable to capture outposts and have a limited movement with fuel and limited ammo, which needs to be refilled with units like Supply Truck, which also has limited amount of refuels and reloads available and needs to refuel at the main base or outpost. Vehicles can also be immobile and need to be repaired if they receive critical damage. Also, speaking of supply trucks, they're basically your only healer in the game, making them pretty important. Another thing that's kinda important to mention is the fact that enemies can lose all their morale, making them neutral and available for either side to claim. Anyway, even later in the game, airplanes and ships also get added, with only specific units being able to take them down. Each unit also has its own upgrades, which change its gameplay usually drastically, either by making them really strong or by fully changing them, like giving them another ability. New and more powerful units can also be unlocked by having the specific units unlocked before them, basically making you try out units you usually don't care about. Noobs in Combat is probably the most strategic game on this list, with fun mechanics which are easy to learn but hard to master. Anyway, let's move on to our next game, Hexaria. Hexaria is a card-based game, but probably with the most fun twist to it. Hexaria changes the entire idea of card games, putting you into a small hexagon arena. Get it? Because the game's called Hexaria. The game starts with you arriving in a small town overrun by bandits, and your help is needed to take care of them. And after you've done that, there's honestly almost no story, but the gameplay is just absolutely incredible, with each card being way more unique than the last one. Ranging from basic punches and knife stabs to literal cancer, this game definitely has at least 40 cards perfect for your deck. Speaking of, you get cards by opening packs, and then from the cards you get, you create your own deck with a maximum of 40 cards. In this game, you also don't have your normal mana system, since you get 1 mana per turn, which means you need to think about just spamming your low damaging moves, or waiting to get more powerful ones or strategic ones. In the hexagon arena, you're allowed to move 2 hexagons in any direction you want, and you're able to use an attack in the same turn with its own range, since it wouldn't make sense if you could just punch someone from 5 miles away. The world of Hexaria, while not the most original, definitely has some interesting characters and worlds to explore, with unique stories from all characters and rewarding cards from difficult challenges like bosses. Enemy types aren't also just bandits. There's also zombies, skeletons, whatever this is, vampires, necromancers, mages, undead mages, ice mages, fire mages, and probably even more mages I haven't named, and even cupids, pumpkins, and seal eggs. But all of them have their own unique decks, and each enemy also has a chance to draw one of its cards after you beat it in battle. The bosses are, however, basically almost impossible to beat solo, so a team is pretty necessary, and if you're lonely, you can bring a few out of the many summons in Hexaria, with all of them, again, having unique decks. And speaking of bosses, each boss has its own legendary card, which can be obtained from them, which makes refighting them always worth it. There are also seasonal events with recurring characters with their own stories, missions, cards, and bosses. Hexaria is one of my most played Roblox games, and for good reason, because this game is just an incredible experience with friends or just with random people, and I heavily recommend it. And before we get to our last and probably the most well-known game on this list, I'd like to ask you to subscribe if you're enjoying this type of content, and or Block Tales is the most well-known game out of all these three, and for good reason. Having really fun combat inspired by Paper Mario with unique mechanics and an incredible story and characters. At the start of Block Tales, you're an average Robloxian who is about to go to a Roblox event, but the event gets interrupted by a mysterious figure who accidentally sends you back in time. Your mission in Block Tales is to collect all the Surfer on the Heights scores for Shedletsky and help him rescue Builderman. The game's combat is basically your average turn-based combat, but you're also able to dodge enemy moves by perfectly timing your dodges to enemy attacks. You also have to time most of your moves for them to actually do damage. This game is also a card game, where you collect different cards around the map or buy them from shopkeepers around town to use in your next battles. When I say this game is good, it's an understatement, because this game doesn't just have good gameplay and characters, it also has an incredible soundtrack and insane animations for literally every item and enemy in the game. All the enemies also feel fair to fight, and you really don't need a team for the bosses since their health scales with the amount of players and the dodging mechanic adds a fair challenge. The world of Block Tales is also just charming. Not just design wise, but also with the characters, because it feels like every character really is its own character, with different personalities, interests, priorities, and backstories. Hell, even some of the background characters have all of that. One thing I will say though, the game isn't the most fun in chapters 1 and 2, but chapters 3 and 4 are just absolute cinema. Hey, so chapter 5 of Block Tales came out like last week, and I didn't want to change the script, so I'm just going to talk about it in this short section. Chapter 5 is probably the best chapter out of any of the other chapters, having somehow a better story than all the previous chapters. All the characters are likable, and even some that are annoying still have some redeeming qualities. Also, the chapter 5 boss battle was, in my opinion, probably the best and most fun and most unique boss battle that's ever been on Block Tales. That might be because I main support and use healing cards. I'd also like to talk about the summons for a little bit, since those are now really useful, especially if you're playing solo. And all of these summons, or call for help cards, summon a character who always has a different set of abilities or a different style in how they fight. Cruel King, or Blackrock King, how he's called now, has freezing, area of damage, and just some blunt attacks he can use. Red and Blue, just being able to pierce the fence, so good for just small chip damage. Griefer or Brad is just really good for overall DPS, since most of what he does is just attacks. He's also a decent support, being able to bodyguard one player. Then there's Calypso, who I personally didn't use a single time in battle, and the newest addition being Call Cassie, which is probably the strongest one out of them all, being able to give your entire party status buffs, being able to heal your entire party, and being able to apply negative status effects to enemies like Burn, and just having overall good damage with abilities like Smite. And if you haven't played Block Tales yet, genuinely, what are you doing? Because this game is actually one of the best story, funniest games, if not the funniest game I've ever seen and played on Roblox.
Oh,
What?
oh. Killer!
What?
Man.
He's fucking Viltrumite.
What?
It's gonna conquer it.
And just one of the most fun games that you can find on Roblox.